In the year 1813, the British fleet had entered the Chesapeake Bay during the War of 1812, ready to create havoc. The HMS Poictiers captured the Baltimore privateer High Flyer and added it to its fleet. And because of the build of the Baltimore Clipper, it was used to lead raids and go into the inlets of the Chesapeake Bay. One of the raids that the High Flyer led was the Battle of the Rappahannock River in Virginia. Late March, American Captain William Stafford and his privateer ship, the Dolphin, had to go back into the Rappahannock River because there was a British blockade happening. And to avoid capture, he had to sail 15 miles inward. The local pilot who was supposed to guide Captain Stafford leaped overboard and drowned because he was fearful of British capture. So that left William Stafford and his crewmen alone to find their way up the Rappahannock River, which they did successfully. However, when the Dolphin was being rowed to safety, it was chased by two unknown vessels, which turned out to be American letters of marque. The Arab, captained by Daniel Finch, and the Lynx, captained by Elisha Taylor. The three American captains decided to stick together because there's protection in numbers. The following day, a fourth American vessel, a schooner called the Chaser, captained by Thomas West, joined them, and Captain West gave information to the other captains that he was being chased by a British frigate and a small fleet behind him. With this new information, the four captains decided to stick together, and when they had the opportunity, they would run the British blockade together. The British frigate that was chasing the American schooner Racer had Lieutenant James Polkingthorne on board, and amongst Polkingthorne's small fleet was the former Baltimore privateer High Flyer leading the raid. So when Captain William Stafford of the Dolphin saw the Baltimore Clipper, he assumed it was another American in need of help, and so he sent his vessel to come to its aid. But when William Stafford saw the British fleet behind him, he immediately turned around and went to join the other three American ships. Because Captain William Stafford of the Dolphin was the only privateer among the Americans, the other three captains, they didn't have the discipline needed for action to fight against enemies of equal force. Completely disorganized, the American line immediately collapsed as soon as the battle began, because Captain Daniel Finch of the Arab, first of all, he stayed anchored away from the other three captains, and yeah, he did fire a few shots, but he cut his anchor and then floated towards shore and tried to set his vessel on fire, which the British put out immediately, and so he got captured. The Lynx, captained by Elisha Taylor, he immediately struck his colors. Like, he didn't even fire a shot. He just said, "I give up." The Racer did a little bit better because, well, I mean, yeah, they did fire shots, and when the British boarded their ship, I mean, like, they did put up a good fight, but they got captured, they got overturned, and then their guns was used on the Dolphin, and so Captain William Stafford was alone because his allies just. What's so amusing about High Flyer was after it participated in raids in the Chesapeake Bay, it got sent up to Halifax with Lieutenant George Hutchinson commanding it. About September 23rd, Hutchinson saw a frigate, which he mistaken to be a British frigate, but was actually the USS President, commanded by Commodore John Rogers. Believing it to be the HMS Seahorse, Lieutenant George Hutchinson sailed the High Flyer up to the USS President, and, well, Commodore Rogers, he was like, okay, this is kind of weird, but he sent one of his lieutenants dressed in a British officer's uniform to go on board the High Flyer and speak with the commander of the Baltimore Clipper. The American lieutenant disguised as a British lieutenant as George Hutchinson for its signal book, which George Hutchinson willingly gave, and the American lieutenant called George Hutchinson over onto the USS President. Again, George Hutchinson thought it was HMS Seahorse, so he just like went along. Sent into Commodore John Rogers' cabin, Lieutenant George Hutchinson told the American Commodore that he had orders from Admiral Warren to capture the USS President and its commander, John Rogers. Hutchison told Rogers that he had never seen the American Commodore before and heard that he was an odd fish and hard to catch. Baffled, the American Commodore asked the British lieutenant, "Sir, do you know what vessel you're on board of?" To which the British lieutenant replied, "Why, yes, sir, I'm on board His Majesty's ship, the Seahorse." To which John Rogers answered, "Then, sir, you labor under a mistake because you are on the United States President and I am Commodore Rogers." Back in May 1813, Highflyer was part of a raid that burned down Hardy Grace, which is John Rogers' home, but he was out at sea, and so his wife, mother, and two sisters were left behind. When the British were about to burn the house down, the women pleaded the British officers not to do it because many of the local villagers had come to seek shelter at the mansion. Seeing that it was full of women and children, the British officers left the house alone, but they insist on searching it in case they could find any hidden documents, like in the writing desk or other furniture. Seeing a mahogany desk, one of the officers liked it and so took it on board the flyer, a high flyer. As fate would have it, Commodore John Rogers recaptured the Baltimore privateer ship High Flyer, and upon this privateer ship was his old writing desk.